Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I will be building a custom bed frame that needed to be finished in just 1 week. So stay tuned and we'll get into the details. Alright, so here I am starting off with a bunch of ash hardwood that was gifted to me about 2.5 years ago by my aunt, way before I even started taking woodworking seriously. And I am just planing each side to get it to the proper thickness, which ended up being right under an inch. After surfacing, I thought it would be best to start filling in all the imperfections in the wood. I cleaned them out to allow better contact and used some Starbond CA glue to fill in the voids. I did realize that I probably could have waited for this step because I ended up working around some of these major knots. After running the material through the planer one last time, I used my track saw to give me a 90-degree edge to reference when laying out the templates. I find that this is the best method rather than trying to balance the long boards on my Facebook Marketplace joiner. I'm using some 1/4-inch templates I made up, and this is normally when I'd plug the build plans that you can purchase, but unfortunately, I don't have any. So let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in a set of plans. This next step is crucial, so I double checked my table saw blade angle and cut the boards to have more manageable pieces for the next step. And before we go any further, it's probably a good idea to talk about the design of this piece. I designed this based on how much ash I had in the shop. I went with a 30 and 60-degree joint between the rails and the legs to get my 90-degree angled leg. Why 90? A favorite woodworker, Chris from Four Eyes Furniture, said, "I'm willing to risk a stub toe in exchange for the look that I want." Let's just say I am not. He clearly hasn't stubbed his toe in a while. To make the cuts, I started off by creating a sled so that I could replicate two identical legs for the baseboard. So as you can see, I line my template piece so that the joint faces are perfectly flush with the cut edge on my sled. And then I am going to take a fence piece and match the angle of the outside edge, taking my smaller fence piece to reference the top of my template and attach these using double-sided tape. This is one of many techniques that you can use to make these cuts. In my most recent TV stand build on Instagram, I made identical legs to match the bed and used a flush trim router bit to get these cut out. The next cuts were going to be even trickier, as I wanted to keep the leg and headboard one piece so that the grain continued and was more aesthetically pleasing to the eye. I started by using my table saw to creep up on my marks. I raised the blade as high as it could so that I could cut away most of the material with the saw. Since this bed is being built for myself, I saw it as an opportunity to test some new ideas, knowing that they could go wrong. Luckily, it went just fine, and after I had both pieces cut on the table saw, I used my track saw to make the next two cuts for the legs, trying my best to make them identical. I'd be lying if I said all these cuts went perfectly fine, but in the end, I was happy with the results. This next cut was when I had to be the most precise, as this was going to be the 30-degree angle, and yep, that's my forearm. Sorry about that. But I made the cut and finished it with the handsaw. Before moving on to assembly, I cut all the legs down to their exact height. I designed this bed to have a good amount of storage underneath, even allowing me to add drawers in the future. Since the room size isn't the biggest, it was the little details like this that helped make the space more functional. I finished all the cuts for the baseboard and headboard, and was ready to move on to the next steps. Since I wanted this bed to be broken into 4 sections, I had to find a way to join the rails to the baseboard and headboard. My best idea was using some small joint connectors, which are usually used for joining countertops. I used a template to mark and drill these connections, and then went through with my palm router and cut the grooves. I had to be careful not to go too deep in the material so that it would have a solid connection, but also deep enough that the hardware applied even pressure on each side. I carefully took about a 16th of an inch off at a time until I had the desired depth. I decided to break out the old track saw for cutting the sectional walnut I'll be using for the headboard. I have a short YouTube video if you'd like to see how I made this circular saw jig. It wasn't until about 3 months ago I finally invested in my Kreg track saw. But this jig lasted well over 2 years and many hours of work. I had to use my router sled to surface this piece, as it was just a little bit too big for the CNC. So I started by getting it secured in place, just using a couple blocks for some holds. Then I used this monster 3-inch surfacing bit to start the flattening process. I'd always been intimidated by large router bits like this. Not only that, I was afraid that a router sled needed to be fancy rails and use bearings to achieve a perfect surface finish. While this may help, I learned that a router sled does not have to be anything special. I simply used a couple strips of plywood and fastened it straight into my workbench. It isn't perfect, but it has allowed me to surface slabs, surface my epoxy pours, ultimately expanding my arsenal of projects I can make. So, what I am saying is, don't be intimidated by a router sled. There are so many ways to go about building one, and it definitely will make you a better woodworker. I thought I could be Cam from Blacktail Studio, and instead of using some CA glue to fill the knots, I spent a good hour making filler dowels so it would all be walnut. What I learned quickly is I may need a little bit more practice and patience trying to match the grain direction and color, but surprisingly, after using my expensive saw to flush trim the dowels, I hit it with some sandpaper and they were almost completely invisible. No, no, they were not. But this was okay because it was going to get covered up by the mattress and pillows. This is probably the only sanding you'll see me do in this video. But I promise you, I was sanding each section between almost every step. We were now on the final steps before assembly. I cut the headboard to size and started routering the roundover on each piece. I always find it funny when I'm watching a YouTube video and the creator imagines these fake scenarios with their audience, trying to answer all their questions or refute all their rude comments. But now, as I'm editing this video and watching me work and thinking of all the different things I could do, I'm right with them. Each step, I think of things I could have done differently, and then think of you guys and think of what you'll say. But I would hope that YouTube viewers are just a little nicer than they are portrayed in a lot of videos. Yes, there were probably many ways that I could have built this bed differently, and many things I could have done better. But like they say, work harder, not smarter. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. Moving on to assembly, I debated on whether or not I should go and buy a Festool domino joiner, or just use some pocket hole screws and biscuits, and I think you could probably guess which one I went with. Like I said, this project allowed me to try new things and experiment a little bit, as I was going to keep this piece and could see how the piece held up over time. So I decided to just use some simple pocket hole joinery that would all be hidden anyways, and then use some biscuits for alignment. This method, paired with a little bit of tight bond, really was simple and gave me a clean and strong joint between each piece. I used the same technique when putting the headboard together, and it was finally looking more like a bed. I guess this would be a good point in the video to ask if you guys would hit that subscribe button. By now, if you're still watching, you probably don't hate my voice and are probably a little bit interested in woodworking. And I know, I'm so funny and good looking, I get that a lot, but I will say this. My YouTube channel is nothing but some poor quality videos. But my goal this summer and in the next couple years is to start creating more furniture like this and putting together some more high quality YouTube videos. So I'd really appreciate the support and feedback. I do have to give a quick shout out to Bessie Clamps. They really helped me on this glue up and saved me a lot of time frantically scrambling to get these pieces together. Although it looks like I just clicked everything into place, it was a little bit more complicated to line up everything perfectly and get it together. Luckily, I was able to combine some Bessie and some Harbor Freight clamps to get this piece exactly where it needed to be, and drove it in with some pocket hole screws, just to give the joint a little bit more strength. The final step before I could put some finish on the bed was to figure out how I was going to hold the mattress. I'm going to be honest, I don't know much about bed construction, but I do know that there are slats that go across the bed. I don't know how many, and I don't know the correct spacing, or if there even is a correct spacing, but I figured since this was a twin size bed, it really couldn't be too complicated. So I just cut some pieces, glued them onto the rails, and then used some brad nails to hold it in place while the glue dried, and for some extra strength, drove in some Spax wood screws. In other bed builds, I've seen a piece down the middle to also support the mattress, but again, this bed is not too big. I would recommend adding a middle support if you were building a bed that was a little wider than this. For the slats, I used some quality pine, cut them all to length, and added a quick round over. I know you don't need material this thick, and probably this many slats, but this is what I already had in the shop and wasn't about to go get more material. Then it was time to move on to finishing. After sanding everything up to 220 grit, I taped off the sections that I didn't want any finish. For the finish, I'm using Osmo Clear Satin Extra Thin Wood Wax. This is my second time using this finish on a big project like this, and I absolutely love it. It's a very simple one-part application process. You just wipe on, give it some time to cure, and then wipe off. I love the natural look and feel it gives the wood, and I love how it pops the grain and brings out the true colors while giving it a protective surface. Not only that, for furniture, they only recommend one coat, which saves me a lot of time. I tried not to bore you with so many shots, but every single section was so satisfying, and as a woodworker, this is the most rewarding part of the build. I had done it. In just 3 days, I had built myself a pretty nice bed, which left me with 2 days to make a TV stand. At least that is what my brain told me. Long story short, I ended up picking up some more ash material from storage and starting yet another project for myself, and moving in a week later than expected. If you want to see the full furniture set that I finished for my bedroom, go follow me on Instagram at Joshua Taylor Woodworks. This is probably something that you've never seen before, and it's only something that I have seen once on another bed in our house. But to hold the slats in place, I picked up some Velcro and added a long strip on each rail, eliminating the hassle of them moving around. This was probably a little bit unnecessary, but as a woodworker, I felt like everything needed to be secured, and in my head, it made me feel better that each one was exactly where I laid it, with the same spacing under the mattress. I think it's the little details like this that separate my pieces from traditional furniture. Just another detail that will never be seen, never be appreciated, and probably never even understood. Overall, I would write this up in the books as one of my favorite projects, not because it was for myself, even though this was my first piece of furniture that I have ever built myself over the past 3 years, and not because it was my favorite thing I have built, but because I learned new techniques and focused on the details. I'll let you enjoy the finishing shots, but let me know if you made it to the end of the video by starting your comment with your favorite wood species, and I hope you enjoyed the video.